Father in heaven, I'm just so thankful, Lord, for this beautiful day. I want to thank you, Lord, for your wisdom that you give to us, Lord, that we may learn new things. And I pray that your Spirit might be here with us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So, my name is Pablo. I am originally from Brazil, like the last guy was here. And I've been here in UT Pines for about a little bit over 2 years. And I serve here as a lifestyle practitioner in the medical staff. So it's my privilege to be here today. And today I'm going to be sharing about fasting. How many of you have fasted before? Okay, how many have fasted for 1 day? 2 days? 3 days? Longer than that? Oh, okay, we have some people that did that. So today we're going to talk about why fasting is good for us, why it's important for us to fast sometimes, okay? Before we go to jump in the topic itself, I want to show some interesting data. This here is the deaths per 100,000 people in the US in the 1900s on your left, and then the 2010 on your right, okay? So one interesting thing is we can see the difference between them, especially because if you see the 1900s, what is the lead cause of death? It's infectious disease, right? Especially because we also had a pandemic on the 1900s. So people were mainly dying because they were not able to treat infectious diseases, okay? And although we see cancer, I don't know if you can see well, but we have cancer and heart disease there, like a little bit. But then 100 years later, that shifts tremendously because infectious disease now is just a tiny little bit you barely can see on the top there. But cancer and heart disease are the biggest lead cause of death in the US. And something that is very interesting is that cancer and heart disease are known today as a lifestyle-related diseases, right? And then we can see something very interesting. This here is a chart of self-reported obesity. This is not only they researching it, it's people selling I am obese. So self-reported obesity, this is 2021. And we can see here, as darker it is on the map, the more percentage of the population on that state are obese, okay? So if we see the dark color over there, the kind of the orange color, is about 35 to 40%, and the darker ones that we have in the map is from 40 to 45%. And I want you to notice something here. What are the darker colors are in the map? About in the center eastern part of the US, right? So it's like the center part towards the eastern part, that's where those darker colors are. So that's where the most obese people are per state. Now, notice something very quick. This is the heart disease and death rates from 2018 to 2020. Where are the dark colors? Center, southern, eastern parts of the US. This is the rate of new cancers in 2019. Where are the darker colors? Same area. So we can see that there's a correlation between the way we live our lives and diseases, right? So this is just an interesting data that we can look at. But now we have a question. Why? Why should we fast? What are the benefits for it? On Testimonies for the Church, Volume 7, Ellen White says, there are some who would be benefited more by abstinence from food for a day or two every week than by any amount of treatment or medical advice. To fast 1 day a week would be of incalculable benefit to them. it says abstinence from food for a day or two every week. Okay, they would benefit more of that by any amount of treatment or medical advice. Just for us to have a little background on the history of fasting, Hippocrates, he also talked about fast. You know, we see that he has this famous phrase here in the middle of this quote that says, "Our food should be our medicine," right? Our food should be our medicine. But we usually stop there. But he keeps going on the same quote. It says, "Our medicine should be our food. But to eat when you are sick is to feed your sickness. Instead of using medicine, rather fast a day." Our food should be our medicine, yes, but to eat when you're sick, you're feeding the sickness. Instead of using medicine, rather fast a day. We had this gentleman here, Isaac Jennings, and he was one of the first ones to use fasting as a therapy, okay? So he had a little plan that he would use, that he discarded the use of drugs, and he would recommend pretty much the 8 natural remedies. So sunshine, water, rest, emotional balance, vegetarian diet, and with fasting. And he had a lot of success on people, on his cases, using this kind of treatment. Not only that, but we have this sanitarium in the past, the Battle Creek Sanitarium, right? Where we had Dr. John Harvard Kellogg, okay? And especially on the 1918 epidemic, when people were dying around in the globe, he was using the exercise, the nutrition, all the 8 natural remedies to treat the people. And he was having a very, very high success rate in treating people that were sick. He was having a very high, even more than the hospitals. So we see that God has created a plan for us for when we are sick. And if we are to follow those plans that God has for us, we will have a higher chance of success in recovering our health. And just again to remind this, that there are some who will be benefited more by abstinence from food for a day or two every week than by any amount of treatment or medical advice. To fast one day a week would be of incalculable benefit to them. Now, yesterday Eric talked a little bit about some things about fasting when he was relating to hypertension, right? How fasting can help with hypertension. And he mentioned this here, that our body has these states that we call it the fed state and the fasting state, okay? So of course the names are, you can tell, fed state is when we are eating, a fasting state is whenever time we are not eating. So let's see what happens. Let's see what happens on those states. So on their fed state, so our fuel source is what? The food that we are eating, correct? So when we eat food, we are introducing the nutrients in our body. We're going to have an hormone that is called insulin, right? And what insulin does? Well, insulin is going to allow that after that food is digested, it's going to go to the bloodstream. So insulin is going to allow so that food that is in there can enter the cells of your body to be used as a energy, right? So when we eat, our body, our pancreas in the beta cells is going to release insulin. So when we're eating, our insulin goes up. Why? Because we need that food that is being digested to go out, to go from the bloodstream into our cells, right? Our blood glucose is go high. Why? Because again, our food is going to be broken down to different aspects, and one of the main ones is going to be the glucose, okay? Our ketones are going to be low, and we're going to be talking about ketones a bit later, okay? Our metabolic rate is going to be low because one of the things that's going to be happening in our body is when we're eating is we are going to be storing extra food, right? So whenever we don't use as immediate energy, it's going to be stored. And we don't need a lot of metabolism for that to happen. Okay, you can see here on the very on the bottom 3 there, the second one, it says glycogenesis. What is glycogenesis? Glycogenesis is when we have we used already the glucose that we need. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the extra glucose, we're gonna aggregate them together in something called glycogen. Okay, something called glycogen, and that's gonna be stored in our liver to be used as an energy later on. And not only that, but we see that there's another thing called lipogenesis, which means that whatever glucose is not converted into glycogen is gonna be converted into fat. Okay? Is going to be converted into fat. So that's what's going on when we are eating. But now, what's going on when we are fasting? So when you're fasting, it's pretty much going to be the opposite. So our fasting state, our fuel source is going to be the stored glycogen that we have. And when that is depleted, we're going to be using our fat as a source of energy. So when we are fasting, our insulin is going to be low. Why? Because we don't need it at that time, because the insulin is to allow the glucose to go from your bloodstream into your cells, but now your blood glucose is low, so we don't need insulin at that time. And there's another hormone that's going to be working, and we're going to be talking about it later. Okay, our ketones is going to be high, and ketones they just come from the breakdown of fat. Okay. So they're going to be breaking down to fat acids and everything. So it's going to, at the end, it's going to be ketones. And so that's going to be our main source of energy when we are fasting. And our metabolic rate is high. Why is our metabolic rate is high? Because instead of storing now, what we're doing is we are breaking down what we already have. And we're going to need energy of our body to do that. Okay? So, and then there's instead of doing glycogenesis, which is the production of glycogen, we're going to be doing glycogenolysis, which is breaking down the glycogen to utilize that glucose, okay, as an energy. And when the glycogen are depleted, we're going to do something called lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat to be used as a source of energy. So this is just what happens in our body with the fat and fasting stages. And we can see here the whole process, how it's utilized for energy. We have, of course, 3 main sources. We have the carbohydrates, or fats and proteins, and that's just like telling the processes that they have until they can be converted to energy. But now, one interesting thing is this. So we talked about insulin, right? So insulin is released when we are eating. But especially when we have, what is the problem when we have too much insulin, or we have constant insulin in our bodies, okay? So when would you have constant insulin? If we're eating all the time, okay? And one of the things that insulin is going to do in our whole body is, of course, in the liver, for example, we're going to have glycogen synthesis. We're getting the extra glucose to make glycogen. We have lipid accumulation, which means that we have more fat now because we are constantly eating, and the extra glucose is not converted to glycogen. It's going to be converted into fat. And because of that, our inflammation in the liver is going to go up because of the whole process. Okay? And in our fat tissue, we're going to have lipogenesis. So we're going to be adding even more fat to that fat tissue. Okay? And also can lead to inflammation. In our brain, when our insulin is high, it's going to lead us to feel hungry more often, okay? It's going to lead us to feel hungry more often. So if it will give us the need, not the need that we really need it, but we're going to think that we need to eat because of that. We're going to be hungry. And so this is just some things that happens in our body. And as I mentioned, our metabolism is going to be slower because we don't need to use the energy to break down things because we're getting everything for our fuel from the food. Okay, so although insulin is necessary for us to live, we need insulin. Constant high levels of insulin, it's not good. And there's even something today that is greatly related with diabetes type 2, that is something called insulin insensitivity. That means that your body cells, they are not able to utilize your insulin well. And when that happens, you're gonna also have higher levels of insulin, and that's all here is gonna be happening in your body. But God is so good and is so wise. In our body, we have something called homeostasis. What does homeostasis mean? Balance. Balance. So our bodies work with balance. So what is the hormone that is going to not say counteract, but to do pretty much the opposite job of the insulin? Also produced by our pancreas, but not by the beta cells of the pancreas, but the alpha cell of the pancreas. We have a hormone called glucagon. We have a hormone called glucagon. And pretty much what glucagon is going to do is the opposite of insulin. And when do we produce glucagon? When we are not eating, when we are fasting, okay? Glucagon, let's see what it's going to do in our bodies, okay? In our brain, our food intake is going to go lower. Our appetite is also lower, and we have this sense of satiety, okay? In our liver, we're going to have glucose production and glycogen breakdown, because again, since we're not eating, we have to use energy from somewhere. So the first thing it's going to do is going to tell the liver, hey, break down the glycogen that you have over there into glucose so we can utilize as energy, okay? And also going to lead to insulin secretion, because we still need the glycogen that's break down to glucose to enter our cells. And not only that, but it's also going to start telling the liver, hey, listen, we're going to need some extra energy later, so start breaking down that fat that you have over there. So we start breaking down the fats, we have the lipid breaking down, and that's going to be increasing our ketone body production, because the fat at the end of the process is going to be converted into ketones. Okay. One interesting thing is when the glucagon is higher, our brown adipose tissue, so our fat tissues, the resting energy expenditure, it goes up. What does that mean? It means that simply by us existing and living, we're going to start spending more energy to break down that fat. Okay. And this is just some of the things that happens when we have glucagon. So again, glucagon we have, the insulin we have when we're eating, glucagon we have when we are not eating or fasting, okay? And we see that they both work in balance, insulin and glucagon. That's how amazing our God is. That's how He created us. So, for example, when we have a high blood sugar, as you can see at the top, that's going to promote insulin release by the pancreas. Okay, so the insulin is going to stimulate the glucose from the food, okay, into our tissue cells, and is going to stimulate glycogen formation. Okay, and that's going to happen. Is going to happen for us to lower our blood sugars into a normal level. What is the normal level for our blood sugars to be? Between about 70 to 90 is the optimal. Okay, now whenever our blood sugar is lowering, so what's going to happen when we are fasting? Our pancreas is going to start releasing glucagon, and glucagon is going to stimulate the breakdown of glycogen that is in the liver, okay? And that's going to raise our blood sugar into normal levels again. So see how amazing and wise God is that He created those two hormones. Again, we need them in balance, and especially you have to be careful with the insulin. And we're going to talk about why having very high levels of insulin is going to be bad for our bodies. Okay, so now let's talk about ketones. How many of you have heard of ketones before? I think it's something that people talk about a lot. Ketones, right? So ketones, especially when we are hypoglycemic, so it means a low blood sugar, uptake. We're not eating, we're fasting, our liver is going to start producing from the fatty acids oxidation ketone bodies, okay? ketone bodies. And that's going to be one of our main sources of energy when we are not eating. Okay, of course, it's going to take a time for us to shift the way we're utilizing as an energy. And we're going to talk about that later. But one interesting thing about ketones is that cancer cells cannot utilize ketones as a source of energy. That's something very interesting, because here's what happened. Our glucose, when it enters the cell, it passes through some metabolic processes, and it's converted to something called acetyl-CoA, and that's going to go through the Krebs cycle to be utilized as energy. Now, whenever we don't have glucose in our body because we're fasting, the body is going to utilize the ketones to convert the ketones into acetyl-CoA for the process of energy to happen. Now, interesting thing is that cancer cells, they don't have the enzymes that can convert ketones into acetyl-CoA. They have the enzymes that convert glucose into acetyl-CoA to utilize the energy, but they do not have the ones that utilize to convert the ketones into acetyl-CoA. That's something very, very interesting, especially because we know that if anyone were to ask you, what does cancer feed from? Sugar. Why do people talk about sugar? Because sugar is high glycemic, is a lot of glucose. So when we have a lot of glucose, what's going to happen to our cancer? We're feeding it. But now, when we're fasting, and we're going to talk about the ways to fast and the precautions and everything, we're going to have our main source of energy as ketones, so then the cancer cells cannot utilize it as source of energy. So what's going to happen? We're going to give the cancer cells starvation. They're going to be hungry, and that's what we want, right? And one other thing related to that is IGF-1. IGF-1 is the insulin, is a peptide hormone that's called insulin-like growth factor 1. Insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. That is a very important hormone, especially when we are in our teenage years, because it's going to promote growth. Okay, it's going to promote growth from the tissues, bone cartilage, and everything. So it's very, very, very important. And it is produced, is stimulated. One of the main things going to be stimulated from is insulin. So which means that if our insulin is high or higher, our IGF-1 is going to be higher or higher as well. And what is the problem of having too much of the IGF-1 without the needing for it? Well, IGF-1 is going to promote, is being linked with promotion of tumor growth. It's related with tumor growth. It's going to be utilized by the tumor for it to grow. So again, what is the problem of having high levels of insulin? Is because we're going to have high levels of IGF-1 being produced, and that's going to promote tumor growth. So that's why constantly overeating things like that is not good, because when we're doing that, our insulin levels are being high. So, and now, let me ask you a question. How long do you think a person can fast for? 40 days. If you talk to Christians, most of them going to say 40 days because of that's what Jesus went through, you know. But you know, of course, one of the things that's going to depend of how long we can fast for is what? Our body weight. I mean, of course, bigger people, they're going to be able to fast for longer because they have more energy to yeah, exactly. So a person that is thinner, they're not going to be able to fast for that long because they don't have a lot of energy. Okay. Now, this here is just for us to see how it works and how long will it take. So the food that we digest, about 4 to 8 hours, we have energy from that food that we eat, okay, after we eat. After that, after we stopped eating, that 4 to 8 hours, each person is different with the metabolism and everything, the metabolism needs and everything. We're gonna run into we're needing glycogen, okay? So glycogen, it is the glucose that is aggregated on your liver. So then we're gonna be utilizing that for about 12 hours, okay? Let's say about 12 hours. And after that, our body is gonna be like, hey, okay, we need something else. So before it starts shifting into using the ketones from the fat, it's going to utilize a little bit of amino acids. So it's going to break down a little bit of protein for us to be utilize the energy while it does that transition. Okay, so between a day to 2 days, it's going to utilize some of the, when it finishes the glycogen, it's going to utilize a little bit of amino acids from protein, and it's going to already starting to utilize more and more ketones. Okay. And of course, with the ketones that comes from the triglycerides that come from your fat cells, that's going to depend of how much you have. But we can go for about even 8 weeks without needing food, depending on how much we have. And then after we break down all the fat that we don't have no fat, we don't have nothing else, then we're going to start breaking down our muscles for the protein in the very end stage. And this is only when the body says like we have no source of energy anymore. So we can fast for a long time, even 2 months or more. And I'm gonna tell an example that we had that it was done in the past of a person that fasted for a very long time. And again, don't go out just like, oh man, this is great, I'm gonna fast for 2 weeks now. Calm down. Fasting has to be supervised. Again, we have indications and contraindications, and we have a way to do things. For example, here at the center that we have, most of our guests, I say most, not all of them, most of our guests, we put them into a 3-day fast, And I've done that once with one of my guests, like he was not really wanting to do it, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it with you. And it was a great experience. It was a great experience for me to have, and even today, I usually fast once or twice every other week. So, so this is for us just to see how our body goes over things. And again, how long does it take for it to start ketone bodies? Well, about a day to a day and a half already start using, relying a lot on ketone bodies. But even before that, when we start depleting our glycogen, it already start using some of those ketones. Okay, and we're gonna see about that as well. Now, do you think fasting can help your brain? Do you think it can help your brain? So what are the benefits of fasting for the brain? Interestingly enough, when we give a mild energetic stress to our brain, it produces something that is called BDNF. And you can see there on the very bottom there, it says increases BDNF and brain connectivity. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's going to promote neurons growth. They're going to promote the synaptic plasticity. So they're going to promote they're going to increase their resistance of the neurons to injury and diseases. Okay, so what that's going to have, what's that going to do in our body? It means that we're going to have a better memory. We have a better improved cognitive functions. Okay, we're going to reduce the oxidative stress that is in there. Okay, it's going to improve even the mood. It's going to enhance the stress resilience. You're going to be less likely to be stressed, all because of fasting. And how? How do you deliver the mild energetic stress to the brain? There are two common ways: fasting And can you tell me the second one? Exercise. Very good, very good. Fasting and exercise. They're going to do this mild energetic stress to the brain that is going to promote all of those things. Okay? Now, do you think fasting can help with our GI tract? Of course it can. Of course it can. We have this hormone that is released, especially when we are fasting, or what we call the interdigestive period. Interdigestive period. So the period between two digestions, and it's called motilin. Motilin, okay? And we have in our when we eat, we have a movement that is called peristalsis. Peristalsis. So it's like it's stretching and compressing for the food, for the bolus to move throughout the whole GI tract, right? So motilin is called the housekeeper of the gut because it's going to increase the peristalsis on the small intestine to clear it all completely before the next meal. So that's why it's very important for us to understand why would snacking be bad. Because even if we eat a very small thing, let's say we eat 5 little cashews, that's going to activate our digestion, and motilin is not going to be released because it has to be in the interdigestive period. So we're never going to be cleaning out completely our small intestine before the next meal. And what is the problem with that? Is because we know that in our colon we have some bacteria there, and when our small intestine is not being cleared out well enough, that bacteria can overgrow and then can enter the intestine, and we can have infections later on. So that's why fasting, or even just eating regularly in regular hours with a good time between them, it's important. Okay, and we're going to talk about that as well a bit later. Even a dietary restriction, so a reduced calorie intake, can help with reducing the levels of growth hormones, like what? Like IGF-1 that we saw later. High levels of that are linked with tumor growth, and also it has been helping the improve arterial flow and vasodilation in people that are developing atherosclerosis. And that was the first time I said the word correctly in the first try that I can say. But what is that? There's just the plaques that are forming in our vessels, okay? Since we're talking about cardiovascular disease, just gonna go not too much since Eric talked about it yesterday. Some of the things that fasting is going to help in our cardiovascular system or for cardiovascular disease. One of the things is we're gonna reduce the serum triglyceride values. Why are we going to reduce our triglycerides? Because we're going to be utilizing fat as a source of energy. So we need to break down the fat. So it's going to reduce the triglyceride levels. We're going to have a decrease in blood pressure. Okay, the total cholesterol levels are going to be lower. But not only that, we're going to increase our ratio of HDL to cholesterol. And what is HDL? HDL is what we call the good cholesterol. Okay, and LDL is called what we call the bad cholesterol. Because HDL, it stands for high density lipoprotein, and the LDL is low density lipoprotein. And so when it says that we increase the ratio of HDL, our total cholesterol, I mean, the main sum of it is your HDL and LDL. So if we're increasing the ratio of HDL to total cholesterol, it means that we're decreasing the LDL to balance the things out. So that's another advantage, another benefit of fasting. Also, it can help to alleviate the symptoms, especially of congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure is when our heart is not being able to pump blood well enough for our bodies. Okay, and they did a study in the early 2000s, and they get some patients that they had high blood pressure, and they did with them a water-only fasting for 14 days. Of course, the people were supervised, and there were some people that they had blood pressures of like 180 and higher, that they had about 60 points drop after fasting for that time. 60 points. They almost come, some of them, they were hypertensive, they're now normotensive, which means that they're in the normal blood pressure that they should be. And the blood pressure reduction and weight reduction on that combined, so it reduced their medical and drug costs for about $2,700 per year per person. So this can even impact our pockets, because there's a lot of people that are buying a lot of medication for those things, while we can do natural things to help those things out that are pretty much free. How much you have to pay to fast? You don't have to pay for fast. We just have to do it. And another thing is, especially talking about obesity and type 2 diabetes, a lot of type 2 diabetics today, they have been relating a lot diabetes type 2 with obesity. Why? Because obesity, the increased fat that we have, leads to something called, that I mentioned earlier, insulin insensitivity. So we're not able to utilize our insulin well enough. So people that have doing this fasts, they have been supervised fasts, they have been able to eliminate or reduce a lot the medications required for the diabetes. Okay, and we have a study in obesity in 1973, and they had a person, a man. I was a 27-year-old man, and I don't know exactly how heavy he was, but he was very heavy, and he fasted for 382 days. 382 days. Of course, this was supervised, and he had the weight enough to do that. And he lost 276 pounds in the period. So, of course, again, he was being supervised, and he did what he could with the supervision of his medical team. But this is just for us to see how fasting can help not only to lose weight, but even to help our bodies to be more sensitive to insulin, and reduce type 2 diabetes. Okay. Now, do you think fasting can help with inflammation and autoimmune disorders? Of course it can. Definitely. It's going to decrease what we call the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Okay, so this is just like sediments that we have in our vessels. It's going to decrease our pain, stiffness, and need for medication, especially with people that have arthritis or even more rheumatoid arthritis, right? And they even had a study on the 80s, okay, that people were having better grip, more strength, less pain, and less swelling, okay, for fasting 7 days. So we can see that fasting will reduce the inflammation, and we saw that when we having high levels of insulin constantly in our bodies, that is going to lead to inflammation. Okay, so fasting definitely can help with inflammation and autoimmune disorders. And of course, we're talking about fasting, and all we think about, or what we mainly think about, is not eating food for a period of time. And when we usually talk about that, we're talking about a day, 2 days or so. But there's another kind of fasting, and I'm pretty sure you heard of it about before, that is called the intermittent fasting. Okay, and one of the things that, or one of the main things that we recommend with intermittent fasting is something that Eric talked about yesterday. That is the time-restricted eating, the time-restricted eating. And that has to be very well in accordance with our circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm. So what is the circadian rhythm? It's the rhythm that our body have to live, okay? So God created our body in a way that we produced some hormones different times of the day for the needs of that we have in that time of the day. For instance, when do you think your insulin levels are higher, in the morning or in the evening? In the morning. In the morning. Why is that? Because in the evening, what's going to happen with us in the evening? What hormone is going to be increased in the evening? I think I heard somebody saying melatonin. Melatonin, right? So God creates in a way that, especially when light, natural light, for example, especially from the sun, is going down, we can produce insulin, melatonin during the whole day, but especially in the evening hours, our melatonin is going to be increased, so it can induce us to feel tired and to give us good quality sleep. But one interesting thing is when melatonin is being produced, it's going to shut down our pancreas to produce insulin. And what's the problem with that? What happens if we eat a very large meal at night? We do not have the insulin to get that nutrients, the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. Now, what happens today, like in our society today? When usually people have their biggest meals?
In the afternoon.
Not in the afternoon. They have it evening. They have it evening because today our society is like this. Oh, I don't have time for breakfast, so I'm gonna grab a quick coffee or something like that. Eat something quick, and then lunchtime probably a fast food because I don't have time to go home and cook, right? But when I get home back from work in the evening, guess what? I'm gonna eat not like one king, but like two, like the whole royal family. That's how people are used today, and in society. And what is the problem with that? Because that going against the way God created our bodies, is against our circadian rhythm. And when we talk about time-restricted eating, and Eric mentioned today, we like to follow a system that is called the 18-6. The 18-6. What does that mean? 2 meals a day, 6 hours apart, with the 18 hours period of fasting. 2 meals a day, 6 hours apart, with 18 hours period of fasting. Okay? And when should we have those 2 meals in the day? Breakfast and lunch. And why breakfast? Because again, guess when your insulin production is going to be higher? In the morning when we wake up. So if we have a good breakfast in the morning, we are taking advantage of how God created our bodies. And then as well for lunch, and have an 18-hour period. What is going to happen? Just to remind that, as Eric mentioned yesterday, insulin sensitivity is going to go up, which means that you're going to utilize your insulin better. Okay? Your beta cells function on your pancreas is increased. What does your beta cells do? They produce insulin. Your blood pressure comes down. Your stress, oxidative stress, comes down. The appetite in the evening, believe it or not, it comes down too. Okay, the postprandial insulin, the insulin that we have after the meal, is going to come down. Okay, some of the things that we, of course, we have to be careful of, we're going to talk about later, is just, of course, there are people that are going to need, they can't eat like 2 meals a day. For example, teenagers are growing up, they might need a third meal, or people that are severely underweight, they might need a third meal, and we're going to talk about that as well more towards the end. But this is just for us to see that how we can take advantage of what God has given us for our health, okay? And this is just talking about the insulin released at night. But do you think that fasting can help with cancer? Well, we already talked about, especially it's going to reduce the IGF-1 levels. But not only that, okay, we're going to reduce our blood glycemia, so the blood sugar in our bloodstream. And what that's going to do, you have less food for your cancer. Exactly. Not only sugar, I'm talking about food in general, even carbohydrates. Especially high refined carbohydrates. I'm talking about food in general, because they're going to be converted to glucose, especially carbohydrates. Okay, even like especially refined carbohydrates. Now, one of the things is, of course, that's going to not eating a lot of fasting. You're not going to be eating sugars or anything, and that's going to starve the cancer cells. Okay, now one of the things that fasting is going to do is going to increase our peripheral insulin sensitivity. So we're going to be utilized better our insulin, and that's going to decrease our level of insulin in the bloodstream. And decreasing the level of insulin in the bloodstream also reduce the IGF-1 levels that are related with tumor growth. It's going to increase the blood ketone bodies. And again, when we do fasting, that ketones that are being produced, they're not going to be able, the cancer cells are not going to be able to utilize that as a source of energy. And it's going to promote autophagy in most cells. What that means is start promoting for our immune system to start eating whatever does not belong there, okay? Now, we have here a study case from some years back. We have this individual, it was a 57-year-old individual, and he presented here with diabetes type 2, obesity, and hyperlipidemia, which means high levels of cholesterol, okay? And this gentleman was utilizing, it was 12 years with insulin, and he was using 60 units of insulin. 60, that's a lot. That's a lot, okay? And he was taking, of course, some other medications. And here on the right, we can see his blood work. His fasting blood sugar, his fasting blood glucose, it was 173. How much should be again? About 70 and 90. So is that high? Oh, it's very high. But not only that, below that we have something called hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C, what is that? It's like in our blood cells, especially our red blood cells, we have something called hemoglobin, right? And we can say that in the bloodstream, the glucose is going to kind of stick to that, to the hemoglobin, okay? It's going to kind of stick to it. So hemoglobin, yeah. So one of the things that hemoglobin A1C shows us is our red blood cells is going to be alive, let's say it's going to be in our bodies for a period of 90 days. So we can say that A1C is the period of our blood sugar for the past 3 months. So an average of 3 months of blood sugar. And that number should be not higher than 5.6. 5.6. This person's was 12. So that's very high, okay? Not only that, but his total cholesterol was 192. Cholesterol should be about 100 plus your age, so he should be about 150s, 160s maximum. His HDL was 36, which is low, and his LDL was 124, which is high. He had some insulin because he was utilizing the insulin, and he was still producing some insulin naturally, and even his vitamin D was low. Now, this person first he did a fast of 3 days, as we normally do, and also was fasting once a week after that. Green diet, exercise, walking, sunbathing, stress management, spiritual counseling for 34 days. 34 days. So pretty much 2 sessions that we do here. What happened to that person? His fasting blood sugar was 173. What is it now? 101. His A1C, how much is it? 12. How is it now? 9.7. His triglycerides, that was 158. His fat molecules, how much is now? 80. Total cholesterol from 192, 164. HDL was 36. It went to 47. LDL was 124. Now it's 101. And even you see the other things like his C-peptide was still there. His vitamin D is better. His CRP, you can see there in the end, is less than 1. CRP is a C-reactive protein, is an inflammatory marker. It's less than 1, so it means that it's good. Inflammation has reduced in this person's body. And this is only after 34 days, about a little bit over a month. Now imagine if you follow this for a longer time. What are the benefits that we have? So God gave us things that we can do to help. But now, what are the general principles for us to fast? How should we do it? A low salt, vegan, high fiber, low fat, low protein, low sugar diet before and after fasting. So I don't know how many had experience of like some of you, well, most of you showed that you had fasted before. But one interesting thing about when you're fasting, let's say I'm gonna fast for 2 days. At the end of the fast, you think like, oh man, you can put a whole table of food in front of me. I'm gonna eat it all because of the hunger. You know what's funny? It's the opposite. You're gonna eat even less. You're gonna eat even less. Because again, our society is gonna be bigger because glucagon was being produced before that. Not only that, but also it reduces the stretch of our stomach. So we feel more full. And what is to also have a high fiber? For the same thing. So we feel more full with less calories, okay? Also, rest is going to be important. And why it says here, exercise while fasting is discouraged, that is depending of how long you're going to fast and how, let's say, strong you are to that. Because of course, we do recommend like walking while you're fasting, that's completely fine. But if, especially like in the first day or so, if you have energy enough, you can do some other more intense exercise. But if it's going to fast for longer, then you have to be more careful, especially not being used to do that. Okay, of course, people that do that more often, they know the limits, they know what to do, but we have to be careful when we do those things as well, okay? Sunlight and pure water. So these are some principles. And some precautions that we have to have is people with diabetes. And as Eric was mentioning yesterday, especially if they're on insulin, okay? We have to be very, very careful with that. Very, very careful. Okay, so especially when they're using insulin, don't do it without asking a doctor before, okay, a provider before. People with history of gout. People with history of gout also discouraged because fasting will lead to extra production of uric acid, which is the one that's going to cause gout. So if somebody had gout in the past, we just say it's better for you not to fast. However, they can do the intermittent fast, the time-restricted eating. That one is completely fine. Pregnant and breastfeeding women. That's kind of obvious. I mean, you need nutrition to give to somebody else. You're not only eating for yourself, but for somebody else. People with severe hypertension, low blood pressure. Again, we discourage that. People that are severe underweight or with eating disorders, again, and I was mentioning before, like children and teenagers, or people that, especially when they're growing, it's best that if they have the 3 meals, but of course the third meal has to be what? Very light, and it has to be early enough. So what's early enough? About 6 p.m. About 6 p.m. you have your third meal because you give time for digestion to happen, okay? And especially because they, on those ages, their metabolic rate is much higher, so they are able to burn that faster. Now, to finish, we have the true fasting. And what is the true fasting? In the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, I'm pretty sure most of us are used to this chapter. The people of Israel, they used to do a lot of fasting, right? And why would they used to do a lot of fasting? Because they wanted to meet with God. And then they would ask God, why you don't hear us? We're here fasting, we're putting the sackcloth and everything, we're doing everything, but you don't hear us. Why? This is God's response to them. It's not the fast that I've chosen to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. It's not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out. When you see the naked, that thou cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh. What is the true fasting that God is talking about here? Is the fast of self. Is the fast of our own selfishness, our selfish motives. That was God is talking to us about here. And then it says, then your light shall break forth like the morning, and your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here am I. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger, and speaking wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought, and strengthen your bones. And you shall be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. That is a promise. And that is something that we have to do every day. We have fast from self and look to others. And even one of the things that we tell our guests that come here, when you're fasting, when you're going through the period of fasting, pray for others. Pray for others. Look somebody that you can help. That's what the Lord wants for us. He wants us to take our focus from ourselves and put it on others. He wants us to take the focus from ourselves and put it on Him, that we might make Him our everything. So may we use the advantage in our favor for not only the physical fast that we can do, but as well the spiritual fasting that we can do. May God bless you. And if you have any questions, you can take notes. We're going to have a Q&A panel later on at, I believe it's 11:30, 11:45. So just to finish this part, let's have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we are so thankful, Lord, that you create us wonderfully, Lord. We are so thankful, Lord, that not only you created us this way, but you have been teaching us, Lord, the way that we should live. And Lord, I just pray and ask that you might give us wisdom and discernment on how to portray ourselves, Lord, how to take care of this body that you have given us, Lord. And we're so thankful that you gave simple things to us, simple natural remedies, even fasting, Lord. And I also pray that you might take away the selfishness from our hearts, Lord, that we might be serving for you, Lord, that we may see them when people are in need and just run to help them. I pray, Lord, that we might be a light in this world full of darkness. And I pray continuously, Lord, for your presence among us throughout this day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.